I'm Liam, 31, a cybersecurity specialist. My girlfriend at the time, Marissa, was a freelance illustrator, one of those people who lived on inspiration rather than schedules. We'd been living together for 8 months and for the most part, things felt stable. At least I thought they were, until the night I woke up at 2 a.m. and realized something was off. Marissa wasn't beside me. She wasn't anywhere in the apartment. No note, no call, no message. Just a strange, hollow quiet, the kind that makes every instinct in your body go still because something simply doesn't add up. By 4:30 a.m., the door finally clicked open. She walked in like she'd just stepped out for a quick coffee run. I asked calmly where she'd been and she said, "Just went for a drive." Her voice was flat, as if disappearing at 2 a.m. without a word was completely normal. I told her that next time I'd appreciate a heads up so I wouldn't worry. That was all. Nothing accusatory. Nothing raised. But that's when everything snapped. She spun on me and accused me of being controlling, said I was acting like her father, said she didn't owe anyone reports. When I repeated that I was just concerned, she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "If you can't handle dating an independent woman, maybe you should find someone more obedient." I'm trained to notice behavioral red flags: sudden defensiveness, overreaction, unfounded accusations, redirecting blame. In security, when a system reacts like that to a simple query, it usually means something's deeply wrong. But instead of arguing, I switched tactics. I told her, "You're right. If you need freedom, I respect that." She looked almost surprised. Maybe she expected a fight to justify whatever narrative she'd built in her head. She went to bed. I stayed in the dark living room looking back at the last few weeks. The late nights out, the sudden guardedness around her devices, the emotional distance. Every single piece clicked together like a completed audit report. By morning, the decision was made. She'd been using my credit card as an authorized user, my Creative Suite licenses, my cloud storage, my workstation. She even lived in my apartment while contributing barely anything. If she wanted freedom so badly, I would give it to her in the purest, most literal form. At 9 a.m., when she left for a client meeting, I began revoking access. Passwords changed. Licenses removed. Cloud accounts backed up for her and then locked. Credit card access revoked. Everything clean, tidy, and professional, like closing out a compromised profile. Then I called her father, Victor Dalton, a retired Marine sergeant she claimed to resent. I explained the situation. He sighed and said, "I'll pick her up tomorrow. Sounds like she needs a reminder about responsibility." That evening I changed the locks. At 8 p.m., Marissa tried to come home, couldn't get in, and called me in a panic. I told her calmly that since she felt trapped living with me, I was helping her transition to the freedom she wanted. That she could retrieve her things when her father arrived. She screamed, accused me of ruining her life, called me vindictive. But the truth is, I was calmer than I'd ever been. The next morning, Victor arrived with a small trailer. Marissa looked like she hadn't slept in days. She begged for a few more nights, saying she needed time to get back on her feet. I told her the truth. "When I was worried, you called me controlling. So I assumed you didn't want to be here." She sobbed. Victor put a firm hand on her shoulder and said, "Let's go. We'll talk about consequences on the way home." When the elevator doors closed, I walked back into my apartment and for the first time in months felt actual silence, real silence, settle around me. Not the silence of avoidance. The silence of freedom. 3 days after Marissa moved out, my life slipped back into a quiet rhythm. No late-night doors opening, no cold shoulders, no strange tension humming. Underneath every conversation. On the 4th day I got another call from Victor. His voice had the weight of someone who just heard his child confess something truly stupid. "She told me the truth," he said. "It wasn't a walk. She's been seeing some guy she met through freelance work. 6 weeks. Usually while you were asleep." Hearing it out loud didn't shock me as much as it should have. It just confirmed what every subtle change in her behavior had already suggested. When I asked why she didn't just break up with me, Victor replied, "She said she wasn't ready to give up the stability you provided." The part that almost made me laugh was the next detail. The guy had a fiancée. And when Marissa called him after being kicked out, hoping to crash at his place, he told her she'd misunderstood the whole relationship, then blocked her. Victor explained she'd spent the last 2 nights crying, spiraling, and insisting that she had made a mistake. He sounded exhausted, like a man who'd spent a lifetime teaching his daughter responsibility only to watch her run full speed in the opposite direction. I thanked him for telling me. It didn't hurt. It only made everything make sense. A week passed before Marissa tried contacting me again. First a message asking to talk for 10 minutes. Then another. Then, I'm in the area. Please. I ignored them. At 9 p.m. my doorbell rang. I checked my camera and saw her standing outside with a suitcase and a grocery bag. She'd even bought ingredients to cook my favorite meal. I opened the door but blocked the entry. She launched into a speech about reflection, growth, missing me, realizing what she'd lost. The kind of speech someone gives only after losing every backup plan. She kept talking until I finally asked, "Why the suitcase?" That question alone cracked whatever script she had prepared. She said she'd left her father's house and wanted to start over with me. I simply answered, "No." She went silent, then desperate. "If you shut this door, I have nowhere else to go." That was when I finally understood. She wasn't trying to fix us. She was trying to not be homeless. Her pleas turned into small accusations. "You think you're better than me? You think I don't deserve a second chance?" I didn't respond. And perhaps out of desperation or delusion or both, she dropped the line she thought would break me. "Liam, I'm pregnant." For a second I paused, not because I believed her but because I recognized the tactic. I asked how far along she was. 6 weeks. The exact timeline of her affair. When I pointed that out, she panicked. "It's yours." I was careful with him. So I asked, "Careful how?" She mumbled, "We use protection, most of the time." That was my breaking point, not anger, not shouting, just a clean severing. I told her if she was actually pregnant, the first step would be a paternity test. That's all. Nothing more. That single sentence flipped her completely. She screamed, accused me of abandoning her, claimed I never loved her if I'd demand proof. I reminded her calmly, "Trust is something you lost the moment you cheated." When she tried to push past me, I blocked her. She banged on the doorframe, crying loudly enough for neighbors to hear. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The moment she realized I wasn't bluffing, she backed away, grabbed her suitcase, and hurried to the elevator while still sobbing dramatically. The police came 10 minutes later, took a report, and left. About an hour after that, Victor called again. She'd shown up at his home, telling him I refused to support her pregnancy. Victor didn't buy it. He confronted her, took her phone, saw messages to multiple men she'd been lining up as fallback options, and unraveled her lie completely. That was when she admitted to him that she wasn't pregnant, had never been pregnant, and was planning to use pictures of positive tests she found online if I asked for proof. Victor was beyond angry. Not yelling, just deeply disappointed. He told her she'd lost the right to contact me, that she had to live under his rules now, and that her pattern of lying wasn't a phase, but a consequence waiting to happen. I ended the call realizing what should have been obvious. Marissa didn't break because she loved me. She broke because every escape door she built had slammed shut, and she was running out of hands to blame. And though I didn't know it yet, this wasn't even the final collapse. It was only the fault line before the real earthquake. 2 weeks passed without a single message from Marissa. The silence was strange, but not the uneasy kind. It felt like what happens after you delete a corrupt file that's been slowing down the whole system. My routine settled, my apartment felt lighter, and even my work improved because I wasn't unknowingly managing someone else's chaos on top of my own. But then Victor called again. His voice was tighter this time, the kind of tone someone uses when they're about to say something that changes the whole story. "Liam," he said, "I think you should know something, and you're not going to like it." He explained that after Marissa moved back in with him, she'd been trying to find freelance work to counter the mess she'd created. But one of her former clients reached out to him directly. Apparently she'd used Victor's address on a past contract, and accused her of overcharging for hours she hadn't worked. Another said she billed them for licensing rights she never delivered. One claimed she'd used assets from a paid program illegally, something registered under my account. Victor, already fed up with her behavior, started digging. And the more he dug, the worse it got. He discovered she'd logged into my design software licenses long after moving out. She'd accessed a premium font pack tied to my subscription and used it on client work without permission. She even tried to reactivate the cloud folder I had locked, twice, using a workaround she found on some forum. That wasn't all. Victor found emails where she'd pitched new clients and sent sample work she stole from my archived project library. She hadn't just burned bridges, she doused them in gasoline and walked away holding a lit match. Victor sighed before saying, "Her mess is about to splash onto you if she keeps going this way." I spent the next 2 hours checking logs, timestamps, IP addresses. My system showed several unauthorized login attempts from her father's house. Nothing dangerous, but enough to be suspicious if noticed by the wrong people. If she tried to pass any of my licensed assets as her own, I could be held liable for usage violations. So I documented everything, screenshots, logs, records, and sent Victor a detailed breakdown. His response was short, "I'll handle it." And knowing the man, he meant it. Days later, I got a call from a client of hers, someone I had never worked with. They'd somehow gotten my number because Marissa had listed me as a technical consultant on her portfolio without my consent. They wanted to confirm whether she was authorized to use certain tools before they proceeded with payment. That was the moment my patience ended. She had used me when she lived with me, manipulated me when cornered, lied about pregnancy when desperate, and now she was trying to drag my professional credibility into her downward spiral. I told the client the truth, that I was not associated with her work, that she no longer had permission to use any assets tied to my accounts, and that any files she had produced using my tools were unauthorized. They were polite, thanked me, and hung up. But their reaction triggered something else. A chain reaction. Within 48 hours, 2 other clients reached out with similar questions. Apparently Marissa had been building her entire new portfolio using modified versions of my past projects. One even sent me samples, and I recognized every brushstroke. It didn't even bother to change the layer structure. That's when everything finally snapped into place. The 2 a.m. disappearances. The sudden defensiveness. The false pregnancy. The tantrums at the door. They weren't isolated incidents. They were chapters of the same pattern. Avoid accountability at all costs, shift blame when cornered, rebuild identity using whatever resources happened to be nearby. I spent the evening compiling everything into one clean, chronological report. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. I had worked too hard for my reputation to let someone else gamble with it. Victor came to my apartment the next morning. Not Marissa, Victor. He looked older, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. He thanked me for the report, said it confirmed what he had suspected. Marissa wasn't just reckless emotionally, she was reckless ethically, financially, professionally. He told me she'd been confronted with the evidence and broke down, insisting she didn't mean harm, blaming stress, blaming loneliness, blaming the breakup. But Victor wasn't buying it anymore. Intent doesn't erase consequences, he said quietly. She needs to learn that. And then came the part one didn't expect. Victor said he'd temporarily frozen her bank account. Not to punish her, he was legally allowed to because her account was tied to a trust fund he managed. He wanted to stop her from misusing money to cover up the problems she'd caused. She had apparently been preparing to pay off angry clients with hush money rather than refunding them legitimately. Victor refused to enable another cycle of damage. As he spoke, I realized something I hadn't understood until that moment. Marissa wasn't a villain in the comic book sense. She was a person who kept choosing shortcuts over solutions, excuses over honesty, shortcuts over effort, until her life became an avalanche she couldn't stop anymore. And no matter how much chaos she caused, there was always someone trying to shield her from the fallout. This time it wasn't going to be me. And apparently it wouldn't be her father either. But the real collapse, the final irreversible break, was still waiting just around the corner. 2 weeks after Victor froze Marissa's accounts, I thought everything had finally gone quiet. There were no more client calls, no unauthorized login attempts, no late-night drama. Life felt steady again. Then I got an email from an unfamiliar address, a legal inquiry from a boutique design agency in Portland. They wanted confirmation that Marissa had permission to use certain assets from our shared creative library. My stomach dropped. She had tried again, this time using older archived files from my system, passing them off as joint work from a previous partnership. It was the kind of lie that, if left uncorrected, could spread like mold. I replied with a detailed but neutral explanation. Marissa and I were not professional partners, she had no rights to my files, and any materials created using my software licenses were unauthorized. They thanked me politely, and then sent something that made everything click. They attached a sample piece she had submitted. A full mock-up. It wasn't just similar to mine, it was mine with color adjustments and her signature slapped on the bottom corner. When I notified Victor, he didn't even sound surprised. Just tired. Exhausted in the way only a parent can be. That same evening, Victor drove to my apartment again. He looked heavier this time, not physically but emotionally. He told me that Marissa had been spiraling since he froze her accounts. She'd been borrowing money from friends, promising payback through upcoming commissions that didn't exist. She'd even tried to sell her tablet, but it turned out she still owed payments on it. She wasn't eating properly, wasn't sleeping, and kept insisting that none of this would have happened if Liam had just taken me back. Victor said it in a raw voice, like every word hurt him. It's not your burden, he added. She made these choices. 2 days later the fallout began. 3 of Marissa's former clients filed official disputes against her for fraudulent billing. 1 sent a cease and desist. Another forwarded their complaint to a professional ethics board she belonged to. Victor called me from a parking lot, saying he had just picked her up after she had a breakdown during a client meeting. She'd apparently tried to bluff her way through a design review and burst into tears when asked basic questions about her own work. She wasn't just overwhelmed, she was unraveling under the weight of everything she'd built on shortcuts and lies. Then came the hardest part to hear. One night, around 11 p.m., Victor called from the ER. Marissa had fainted from exhaustion and dehydration. She wasn't injured, but she was emotionally wrecked. She confessed everything, to the nurse, to her father, to him. Every lie, every fake invoice, every attempt to manipulate her way out of consequences. She even admitted the fake pregnancy again, saying, "I didn't know what else to do. He wouldn't listen to me." Victor corrected her. "He gave you every chance. You burned all of them." A few days later, Marissa asked to meet me. Not to reconcile, Victor was very clear about that, but to apologize. I agreed, but only in a public place. We met at a quiet cafe. She looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched, eyes dim, hair tied back without her usual effort. The first thing she said was, "I never meant to destroy your life." I didn't respond to that. Intent means very little when the consequences fall on other people's shoulders. She admitted she'd been using me as a safety net, a backup plan, an emotional shelter she never intended to treat with respect. She cried quietly, the kind of crying that comes from genuine remorse or genuine fear, maybe both. When she finally looked up, she asked the question she'd been avoiding, "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" I told her the truth, calmly, gently, and without cruelty. "No. But you can start taking responsibility for what you caused." To my surprise, she didn't argue. She didn't deflect. She didn't lie. She nodded, wiped her face, and said she would start therapy and take whatever legal and financial consequences came next. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Accountability. Not perfect, not pretty, but real. Victor later called to thank me, not for forgiving her, but for not enabling her. He said sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone spiraling is to stop cushioning their fall. Let them hit the ground they keep digging toward so they finally understand which direction leads upward. In the end, Marissa didn't lose everything because I closed the door on her. She lost everything because she kept prying open escape routes instead of learning how to walk a straight path. Her collapse wasn't an accident. It was architecture, designed, built, and completed by her own hands. And as for me, I rebuilt my life on something she never appreciated: truth, boundaries, and the quiet freedom that comes when chaos is no longer in the room.